Hi there, students of economics, and welcome to this teaching module that's titled Privatisation and Globalisation. Well, these two are a part of the new economic policy in 1991 that came about as a consequence of the economic crisis in 1991. The policy that came along with privatization and globalization is one that we have already studied, and that is liberalization. Now we are moving forward with the topic. Stay with me. In this teaching module, we will learn about privatization, meaning, purpose, and method. We will also learn about globalization and outsourcing as an outcome of globalization. Thereafter, we will learn about the World Trade Organization. What is privatization? Now, we know that there are some enterprises in our economy that are owned, run, managed, and controlled by the government or the state. And these enterprises are called public sector enterprises or public sector undertakings. Now, sometimes private sector undertakings are sold. The ownership is transferred to the private sector. And that is when we come across this process called privatization. So what is privatization? It is the shedding of ownership or management of a government or state-owned enterprise. So no longer is the government in control of that particular enterprise that it may sell. It is the private sector that takes over. Now let us look at the method of privatization. Government companies can be changed to private companies in two ways. One, by withdrawal of ownership of the government from ownership and management of these public sector companies. The second, by outright sale of public sector undertakings. Now here I have before you a list of companies that this investment transaction of these companies has been completed by the government. So we have Hindustan Petroleum, Rural Electrification Corporation Limited, National Project Construction Corporation, Dredging Corporation of India, Northeastern Electric Power Corporation Limited, to name a few. Currently, we are seeing the acquisition of Air India by Tata. So we see a timeline here, and even while you are watching, this transaction might have already been carried out, and Tata Sons is now or will be the new owner of the debt-laden national carrier that is Air India. So this company Air India that was owned by the government has been sold now to the Tata Group. So this is an example of how privatization takes place. Now, what is the purpose of privatization, or why do we go for privatization? The purpose of privatization, according to the government, were to improve financial discipline and to facilitate modernization. It was felt that private capital and managerial capabilities that could be seen in the private sector could be used to improve the performance of public sector undertakings, enterprises that even were declared sick units because of the losses, continued losses that they were making and the deficits that were being faced. Here I've put before you some points to help you to understand better why we go for privatization. Privatization helps to reduce the burden on the government. It helps profit-making public sector unit to modernize and to diversify their business. It helps to make the public sector unit more competitive. It may help to improve the quality of decision making so that decisions are free of any political interference. Privatization helps in reviving sick units, as I told you, and these sick units become a liability for the government. Privatization encourages new innovations without any restrictions. It fosters industrial growth, it increases foreign investment, and it is believed to increase efficiency. Brings us to the study of the next phenomena that came about as a result of the new economic policy 1991, and that is called as globalization. Well, to open your mind to understand globalization, I would like you to watch now a small clip that you could familiarize yourself with or even identify, because you see the signs of globalization all around you today, starting from the smartphone that you are holding now in your hands. What is globalization, therefore? Globalization is the outcome of the policies of liberalization and privatization. It is the integration of the economy with the world economy, and it is a complex process. Globalization is the result of a set of various policies that are aimed at transforming the world to a greater interdependence and integration. It involves the creation of networks and abilities which overcome economic, social, and geographical boundaries. Today we can say we live in a global village that has no boundaries. We are dependent on other countries for goods and even services, and they in turn depend on ours. Globalization, therefore, establishes a link in such a way that the happenings in our country can be influenced by events happening miles away. It is so turning the world into one whole and creating a borderless world. Let us now look at the impact of globalization. Globalization has resulted in increased trade, greater choice of goods, larger markets. It has resulted in greater competition, especially for goods that are produced domestically. And so even the prices have lowered as a result of globalization because of the competition that domestic goods face with goods that are produced abroad. The production we see nowadays is more efficient and more advanced. There is an increased mobility of capital and labor across countries. There are no limits to where labor can go or migrate in search of a better job prospect in another country. And so there is an access to a wide talent pool where people are found more skilled, more equipped, more knowledgeable, and so on. At the same time, there are negative impacts because sometimes big multinational companies can act as monopoly power and control smaller companies and smaller countries. So there is a tendency in the world today where rich countries become richer and poor countries become poorer. So it is kind of increase the inequality in income and wealth across countries. Also, we talk about a lot of innovation and ideas that are shared between countries. So designs and ideas can be stolen. And since today we are a part of this global village, tax avoidance is possible. Let us now take the example of the automobile sector across the world. Here we see various brands, international and domestic as well. And we see these cars around our country. People buy and sell them. We also can easily differentiate between domestic and international brands. So here we have the Maruti Suzuki, which is indigenous. We have the Mahindra, which is indigenous. And the Land Rover is now acquired by Tata. We have the Tata Group, which we know is Indian. But the rest of the brands that you see, the BMW, the Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, Renault, Audi, Ford, are clearly, Skoda, are clearly foreign brands. And we have such an easy access to acquiring these automobiles in our own country. And that has come about because of globalization. You can study globalization across various products, different goods. It may be the shampoo that you use, the toothpaste, the toothbrush that you use, right up to the shoes, the jackets that you wear, the clothes, the various brands of clothes that you have. You have an access to a wide variety of brands that have their origins abroad. And all that is because of globalization. And that brings us to study outsourcing, which is a result of globalization. It is an outcome of globalization. What happens in outsourcing? In outsourcing, a company hires a regular service from an external source, mostly from other countries, which was previously provided in the country itself. Outsourcing has intensified and has increased because of the growth and fast modes of communication, particularly the growth of information technology, that is IT. Many of the services, such as voice-based business processes or call centers, that we call them business process outsourcing, BPOs, recording, keeping accounts, banking services, music recording, film editing, medical transcription, book transcription, clinical advice, legal advice, all these are being outsourced by companies in developed countries to India. Why do we need to outsource? Most multinational companies' operations and even small businesses outsource their services to India. The reason for this is that such services can be availed at cheaper cost, skill, and accuracy. The advantages of outsourcing to India range from being cost efficient, we have well-educated, well-skilled manpower, we have a young and dynamic working population that is English speaking largely. Also in India, we saw that the IT sector has been supported by the government and it has grown as a result. Also, there is an adjustable 24-hour work cycle that falls very well with other countries, especially with their timings. And because labor is so expensive in other countries, they prefer to outsource to countries like India, Brazil, China, Mexico, which are the forerunners where outsourcing is concerned. It is imperative for us to mention about the World Trade Organization, since we're talking about globalization, which has much to do with trade. The World Trade Organization was founded in 1975 as a successor organization to the GATT, that is the General Agreement for Tariff and Trade. GATT was established in 1948 with 23 countries as a global trade organization to administer all multinational and bilateral trade agreements, to provide equal opportunities to all countries in the international market for the purpose of trading. Now, what is the purpose of the World Trade Organization? It is to enlarge production and the trade of services, to ensure optimum utilization of the world's resources. The World Trade Agreement covers trade in goods as well as services through the removal of tariff and non-tariff barriers and providing greater access to member countries. As an important member of the WTO, India has been in the forefront of framing fair global rules and regulations and safeguarding the interest of the developing world. India has kept its commitment towards liberalization of trade by removing quantitative restrictions on imports and reducing tariff rates. We know that when we're talking about tariffs, they are the taxes on imports or the duties on exports. All these need to be looked at if we're going to come about with fair trade across countries. I'd like to wind up with a quote by the Nobel Prize economist Amartya Sen. He's an Indian economist and he says, Globalization is a complex issue, partly because economic globalization is only one part of it. Globalization is greater global closeness, and that is cultural, social, political, as well as economic. Thank you, students, for giving me a listening ear. I'd like you to read up more on the topic of globalization. It is very interesting and more interesting because you find yourself bombarded by goods and services around you that are global per se. So thank you again.